Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward.
And discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is brought to you by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience.
Welcome back to a new episode of Clothing Culture. Today, we are discussing a really big topic, the impact of data privacy on e-commerce. There are a lot of questions about data privacy these days. Apple's iOS 14.5 update included app tracking transparency, which required app developers to ask permission before tracking in third-party apps and websites. This was elevated when iOS 15.2 update came in December of 2021, where users can access that data on app privacy reports, telling them exactly what that app is doing with your data. This is absolutely creating a dynamic shift in the industry, in e-commerce, and so we invited resident expert Frank Faricy, who is the founder of CEO and XGen.AI, to aid us in this conversation.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, Frank. This is, we've had firsthand experience with such a massive evolution where, there's this kind of weird balance between privacy and customer experience. And certainly things have happened pretty dramatically recently where that's kind of affecting the marketing efforts for a lot of people in that respect. So great to have you on and look forward to this dialogue.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned that the challenge between marketing efforts and that kind of customized experience for customers. How do you balance that out in this age where data privacy is really key?
Yeah, great question. Thank you both very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Look, privacy is such an interesting topic. I like to equate it to like a gold rush, right? It's like, and it's a gold rush where the material or the object of the rush, meaning gold, is constantly changing from gold to platinum to diamond, back to gold again. And the reason I say that is the beautiful thing about data is you can accomplish all kinds of things from different data, and there's lots of data to collect, right? And obviously, we're seeing this huge trend of an increase in privacy across multiple systems, consumer-facing apps, B2B software platforms, and then you have Europe where the push is heavier than it ever has been through GDPR. And my philosophy on this has always been, look, if you take the fundamental process or concept that if I'm a consumer online, what I'm doing is my private business, right? And that, as a fundamental philosophy, will produce really what everyone is trying to accomplish, both the companies, the customers, the whole nine yards. And what's very interesting about this is, from what I've seen, the advertising space, and indeed a lot of the user experience optimizations on e-com and apps and everything, are still centered around, we don't care who the data belongs to. We don't actually, it's why does it belong to the customer, right? This is really a question of ownership, who does own it, and when is the right, who and when is the right to utilize it. Obviously, there's no strict legislation around this outside of a few pocketed areas.
But more coming every day.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And coming in with, extreme force in the case of Europe. In the most recent cases, you've seen Google Analytics be borderline shut down in certain countries. You've seen YouTube slap for hundreds of $1 million fines. It's really quite shocking to a lot of companies. And the way I recently kind of explained this was, if the fundamental relationship here is brand to customer, right? The customer is looking for an experience. So if they go to a Valentino, which is a great brand, been around for a long time, they want the experience with Valentino. That's what they're looking for. And somehow we've gotten lost and said that, that relationship is monetizable by everyone, right? Which is what third-party tracking is, right? We're going to track this so that we can retarget you not just for Valentino, but for everyone else.
Sure. I mean, that conversation's pretty public where we're the product,
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah. So, I think the industry's changing rapidly here. We all know that. And my overall thesis on the high level position of what's going to happen is any company or any technology that resides in the customer brand and interjecting themselves in between that process as a source of free data, a gold rush, is going to die out in the future. That's my overall concept.
Yeah. And it's just, when you look at e-commerce, so many people have built their businesses on e-commerce platforms solely and using these tools to gain customer traction, and I think it's this mixed kind of emotion you have as a consumer. I'm both happy and a little freaked that if I mention something and as I'm sitting around and the product shows up, I'm like, well, that's convenient. I'm ready to buy it, but hey, how
Feels
did
a
they
little
all?
invasive. Yeah.
It's like they know, but we as consumers like the convenience of being able to have decision making in some ways aided by AI and technology. But then all of a sudden we've got this situation where, and I'm a complete layman about this, but today everything I look at is accept cookies, reject cookies. When you're selectively accepting things, the list is forever. It makes it very difficult. You don't know what to do. You're like, if I'm rejecting something, am I going to lose my user experience? Is the intuition that I've come to expect in my consuming experience online going to change? And so, when you look at that, what do you think today are like the biggest conversations or challenges that e-commerce companies like this are having?
Yeah, I think look, from the top down, the updates to iOS from the consumer perspective are incredible. I think this is the right direction, the way it should be going, providing transparency and control to the customer, because when you do look under the hood technically, it is clandestine, right? It's pretty nasty what they're doing, and a lot of these third-party companies, and if people really knew the truth, they would get freaked out, right?
Yeah, right.
So it's good. But from the brand's perspective, yes, they've been relying on third-party tools for a long time, right? And when I talk to some of the brands that we work with, they do have this conundrum that's, it started off with like, hey, our Facebook targeting's gone off, right? After these updates. Our Instagram targeting's off. And, they're starting to see this perpetuate through the advertising industry. And the reaction to this was something that I really thought was powerful. And that was to say, first of all, first-party data, our data on our relationship with the customer is now the most valuable thing. And I'm like, well, that makes sense, right?
Yep.
That's those customers have opted to give you that data so you can give them a better service, right? That's an honest relationship. But again, it's going back to I see this existential shift towards it's not just about data anymore. It's more about the experience. It's like, are you trying to advertise or are you trying to service the customer? And it is actually two different worlds. You can either follow someone around online until they get fed up and click on it, or just by sheer impressions, get them to engage. The other concept to look at is, well, maybe we should be asking these people what they want and showing them that, right? Which is where I see the future going.
And there's selective e-readers that do that. They sit down and say, what are your likes, dislikes, and they bring up content and news information that appeals to you, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of actually surveying or asking the questions to the customer is not really workable, and we know that in e-commerce.
Too much work for the customer?
Yeah, well, we know bounce rates, we know average time on site, we know we're going to take up half of that on a survey. No, it's never going to work, right?
Right.
But there are technologies that exist that, from the behavior of the customer, anonymized, right? Anonymous behavioral learning that can kind of just understand customers without needing to know who they are, just on that session alone, and can drive a very relevant experience with modern machine learning technologies. And if I look at the future, I would say, look, anonymized learning and being able to, one, have the customer opt into an anonymized process in the aspect of service and having complete faith that that data is not going anywhere else is a very strong proposition to the end consumer and to the brand. And it really does empower the brand. And the last thing I'll say about that is I read a 300-page prediction about the future of retail from a former Andreessen Horowitz analyst. And there was this one slide that shocked me. And it was the last 10 years of search terms and related to product in general, not just fashion or anything like that. And the two search terms were cheapest and best. Now, go back 10 years, cheapest was, 100 times higher. But in the last 4 years, they have done a complete inversion to the point where best is now the strongest search term. And it really does make sense. If you look at the, 50% of the US marketplace e-commerce is borderline owned by Amazon. Yet the product quality there is not high.
Right.
And that starts to seep into everything, the experience, your relationship with the brand, the package you get, is it tailored from that brand? And that's where I really see the market going, is direct to brand, which is why Shopify is starting to take off so strongly in the last few years. And how can we create the best, most meaningful connection with each consumer?
And we've kind of really garnered that by this community of information. We've talked about that in other podcasts where, the 1 to 5 star rating drives decision-making for corporations today, or brands that are doing it. People immediately give feedback if something isn't great. And so it forces the issue on quality and perceived best quality, et cetera. But I think also there is this rise of awareness of, billions of dollars worth of fabric and apparel ending up in landfills and sustainability. And that's a very complex conversation we won't get into today. But I think that there are these number of things that start layering each other where we in the US, and I used to travel quite a bit, and I'm generalizing, probably way overgeneralizing, but when I used to travel to Europe, and I would use Italy as a great example, they would invest a ton on garments and clothing. It was about quality. It was about, I'm going to wear this suit for 20 years, so it's going to have timeless style. It's going to have excellent quality. And they weren't really into the whole disposable clothing mentality or fast fashion. And I'm starting to see that shift in trend in the US and that's a positive. If you can increase quality, you can decrease the disposable and the fad and all that type of thing. I don't think it'll always go away, but I think there is that overall shift where people are looking for that. And then how do you get that information to them? When we look at apparel as our segment in the online space, I always like to say that people like to swing pendulums. So they say, hey, everything's going online. The future is brick and mortar's dead. And I've been down these things a lot of times where they call an industry dead before it's dead. We used to think direct to mail was dead. No one wants junk mail anymore. Well, it's evolved. It's now sophisticated catalogs that you upload beautiful photography you go online to buy. But the junk mail is dead, right? So brick and mortar also is evolving because there's no replacement for the tactile kind of feeling. And I sort of wonder when you're talking about all this and your life is the online experience, how do we improve, how do they digitize that experience online? What's the, with all these challenges that we're seeing that are removing kind of the customer ease of experience, as you see the evolution of all of these things that are happening, what's your take on how someone can digitize the experience of a person that's online shopping?
Yeah, and to your point, the macro trends, in my opinion, oscillates over decades from cheap products to quality products.
That's
and I think during the cheap product reign, you have an overwhelming amount of drive for finance and money, which always exists, right, in profit, but that particularly is strongest, which is where you start to see degradation in service and quality. But look, I mean, in current times, I believe we're seeing the beginnings of a trend towards a higher service degree and demand from customers and a better product, just like you said, right?
Yeah.
And commensurate with that, if you are building an online experience, you really it's not like Online is not scary. Some brands may think it's scary and complicated, and tech is a big scary beast. I just equate it to retail. If you walk into a retail store and you don't have a single sales rep in sight, and you've got one rack in the center, and you expect all customers to just sit there and go through this rack for 15 minutes, it's a giant long rack, well, that's a pretty bad experience, right?
Sure.
And that's what most e-com environments represent today. So they should be looking for systems and technology, which there are great platforms out there that enable them to say, when a customer comes to our store, we're going to give them a unique experience, and we're going to do it in a way where it's a private conversation, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
How do you do that in an online world that previously did that through capturing data? I mean, how can AI evolve to still capture that individualized experience without breaking some of these new rules?
Yeah. So look, in the context of saying
what exactly do you do at XGen, Frank?
Yeah, good question. So I think, look, the basic context here is, okay, if we can give someone, someone goes to Gucci, right? And it's like me, and I go to Gucci and it's like, this is Frank's Gucci store, right?
Yeah.
I would be like, wow. I touch the door handle and it's shaped to my handle grip size. And I go inside and, the like the Matrix, the products on the shelves are realigning to what I like, and the advertisements or the big content or messaging on the side of the wall is adapting to me. I would think this is the greatest thing ever, right?
So the entire store for me would be black T-shirts.
Right.
Probably.
There you go, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I would say, the problem with current day technologies when it comes to e-commerce is e-commerce, and I won't get into the why it's like this because that's a long subject, but e-commerce is very outdated when it comes to tech stacks. It really is. Like it's the wild west of a bunch of shoddy solutions trying to fit together, and ultimately winding up driving a bad experience, right? But that's a longer conversation. So from this perspective, unfortunately, we classify creating unique experiences for customers as personalization. I don't like using that word anymore because to me it comes with a bad connotation. It says, I as a customer are going to be grouped into the local store, meaning, cool, we're building local stores based on what country you're in, right? Or, what city you're in, et cetera. And the reason it's like that is because that tech stack is set 10 to 20 years in the past. It's basically needing hard identifiers like your location. It needs to know, have you been to the site before? All of which are becoming dangerous data points to try and obtain via updates like iOS 15.2, right? Mm-hmm. So the concept behind this is, what is a way that we can do this without needing to know who you are, right? And to put it in context to a retail store, let's say you walked into a storefront, and in order to customize your experience, what pops up is a big iPad with 6 buttons, and it says, where are you from, right? And I say, hey, I'm from New York. Okay, great. Then the store adapts to me, and everyone that hits New York is going to see that same experience. That's what we see today in personalization. But let me ask you a question. If I walked in and a sales rep came up to me and didn't ask my name and just said, what are you looking for today and how can I help you? And then we started to talk about the product, and I picked something up and I put it down and I said, I hate this color. And then all of a sudden the sales rep says, here, come with me to this back room. I have all the stuff you've been talking about pre-configured for you. I would be like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, exactly that can be done through artificial intelligence. It's very, very, very available. And that's exactly what we do in XGen.AI.
Without being invasive.
Yeah. And we can, and if you think about it, what is the data you're looking at? It's not who they are, where they're coming from. It's how are they interacting with your product, right? That's the most important factor there.
That added a lot of clarity.
Yeah, bring it down to us, our level, right?
Absolutely.
Am I smarter than a 5th grader, I suppose?
So what are some additional changes that you see coming in this year and beyond that are going to continue to evolve this space?
I think that's a really good question. We've obviously seen Europe start to put the initial legislative concepts surrounding artificial intelligence in general, meaning what can and can't be used. Europe is talking about a technology sovereignty, right? Like how can we as a nation set the standards for what should be in terms of data privacy? That's a very interesting concept because currently those AI rules, quote unquote, or legislature are fitting more under the concept of like image recognition. Like, London, there's a big, uproar in London about, all the CCTV cameras and then running facial recognition through AI. You can basically know where everyone is at any time. Kind of an invasion of privacy, right? But I do know that it's going to continue to increase into more and more areas, subjects, and topics, including e-commerce, right? Case in point, China actually passed legislation about how and when and what type of artificial intelligence you can use to recommend products and drive personalization on site, which is very interesting. That's a very controlling environment, right? That's getting very detailed.
Changes a little bit for them as the government, because as you drive through streets, their facial recognition technology is insane.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's definitely some oxymorons going on.
Yeah.
So the concept here is, again, I'm going to go a bit more high level. It's like we should not be waiting for governments to try and legislate right now, right? If companies are fixed on a business model, look, I understand and I get it. If you're Facebook, I wouldn't know what to do right now either, in all honesty. I would invent something ridiculous like the metaverse and call it a product and try and
Sounds like a great idea. Maybe you should do that. Yeah.
No, I'm not ragging on Facebook. I just think it's a little bit elusive right now.
Yeah.
So if you're Facebook, I get it. But the beautiful thing about the tech economy, and this is where retail and tech really start to come together, is tech has its own self-correcting process, which is it's an aggressive, the fastest, the most funded, the fastest growing kind of sector in the world. And that's awesome because it allows space for startups to come in rapidly with a lot of funding and challenge those concepts. And the beautiful thing about tech, if done correctly, and a lot of the time, is technology develops based in it actually in the fire of customer demand, right? Mm-hmm. So now that customers are getting a little bit more tech savvy, we've got a new generation coming about, and they're getting the option to say, yes, track me or don't track me, which, by the way, a lot of people are saying no. It forces tech to start developing new solutions, right? So ultimately, this privacy problem is not a big issue, right? You're going to see more and more platforms pop up over the next 5 to 10 years that will provide the solutions for brands. But the great news is for brands that are really wanting to get ahead of the curve, and I know in the US it's kind of different because it's not really, the government is not getting that involved in the data process yet. For those brands, if they want to get ahead or if they're global, there are actually solutions out there that can provide both the holy grail of online experience without needing to identify the customer.
Yeah, I know that you've started working with some pretty major luxury brands out there, and you want to talk a little bit about how they're kind of leveraging this new world of AI to kind of deal the competition in their space, because their whole paradigm is shifting with the customer also.
Definitely. Look, I mean, the trends I see is very interesting. The demand for privacy from the brand perspective is definitely increasing big time.
Yeah.
Especially in Europe, because the government's creating fear, right? They're terrified. They're terrified of getting in trouble. They're seeing these fines. $100 million to any company is not a joke, right? Even Google being fined $100 million, someone got in trouble, right?
Right, sure.
So for them, privacy is becoming a big deal, and the output of that is very interesting. Privacy is more like a checkpoint, right? Do you have XYZ privacy components in place? And when you say yes, it's great. The next thing is when you tell them, look, unique stores for every customer that adapt in real time, this is what they've been waiting for. They've been looking for something like this. I think Bloomberg kind of wrote an article many years ago that this is what the Holy Grail would be, and that day's arrived. And I would say the key trend I see popping up now a lot is machine learning. They know machine learning contains the answer, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning.
Sure. Yeah.
They know machine learning specifically contains the answer. They don't know how, why, or when. But the bigger brands are starting to get savvy, get ahead of the curve, and start hiring maybe a small data science team, not to run or build a platform, but to start understanding the process, right? And the way I called, when we built our platform, we decided to call it. We actually built a tagline specifically for bigger brands that was democratizing machine learning for e-commerce teams, right? And it's true. It's almost like this elite subject that only if you're an advanced developer with a big team you can touch. And our concept was like, why? I mean, it's not complicated. People may think it is, but yes, you need to automate certain things, and if you get that in place, then anyone can control it. So our concept was to be able to have an e-com manager without any coding experience run sophisticated machine learning systems.
Yeah, because those things can be real complicated.
Yeah. So I have one final question for you. Do you have to be an uber wealthy brand or company to implement this technology?
Look, the one thing I will tell you is that, if you're doing between 5 and 10 million gross a year in e-com revenue, not gross revenue, but e-com specific gross, solutions like this are available. Below that point, it does get tricky. I'm not going to lie, right? There are solutions for that, but like us personally, we've not developed that solution yet. We do intend to. The way that data and AI works is the more data you have, the more effective it is, right? If it's good data. Now, unfortunately, smaller brands with less revenue have a lot less visitors, which means less data. So we do have that. There are solutions coming, but unfortunately, that's the most behind is the smaller brands. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of these insights. It seems like it's an incredibly exciting space with, I'm sure, even more evolution to come.
Yeah, and we're excited to hear about the constant, changes in your business, and I think XGen's an amazing product. Just, we had the opportunity to kind of look through it and, and watch what happened. And one, I'm astounded at the ease of implementation, and two, exactly what you've done. I mean, it's very evolutionary. So congratulations, Frank.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm humbled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, make sure to subscribe. Oh, thank you, Frank. Make sure to subscribe to stay apprised of next episodes of Clothing Culture.